Welcome to our session, Redesigning Assignments in the Age of AI. We have a wonderful workshop for you today, and I'm so excited that you're all here to join us. We are going to start off today with a quick introduction. May, would you like to start us off?
Hi, I'm May Klinger. I work in
May, AI and Innovation at HKS. Give it up. Woo! And my name is Esther. I am over at the medical school. I'm the Associate Director of Teaching and Learning Technologies. Oh, thank you, thank you. Teddy, you're up.
Hello. Hi, I'm Teddy Speronos. I'm a senior lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School, and I'm very excited to be here.
Woo-hoo!
Thank you for the applause.
And I'm Tari Tan. I'm an assistant dean in the Office for Graduate Education at Harvard Medical School and a lecturer in neurobiology. And I am also very excited to be here.
Woohoo! All right, so coming up, we wouldn't be really great educators if we didn't have some learning objectives for you today. So we have 4 main things in mind we hope that you'll take away from our session. To diagnose the ways in which AI could be disrupting assignments or assessments, we're going to take that knowledge and then evaluate assignment redesign, specifically focused on those learning goals. Then we're going to identify opportunities, aka active learning, to encourage student engagement for these sort of fundamental skill building. And lastly, we're going to center deliberate choices. And we have a small group activity for you all today. So you're literally going to be putting these skills in practice by the time you leave. So May, I'm going to turn it over to you to start off our discussion around AI disruption.
Thank you, Esther. Okay, so I'm at Slate at HKS. We think a lot about teaching and learning. We make mistakes, we change our mind, and I'm going to give you some foundational ideas about how we've been thinking about AI assignments and assessments that will then kind of lead into what our faculty respondents are doing in their courses and that you can use to think about these things. And you can also strike things through and rewrite them as works for your context. So we're going to start with this idea of disruption. So AI is disrupting learning, it's disrupting assessment, and it's disrupting the skills and knowledge that students need. So earlier at the plenary, our distinguished panel talked a lot about the productive struggle of learning. AI can short circuit that. We know it can. Learning takes time, it takes effort, it takes iteration, it takes failure, and AI is sort of like an appealing shortcut in certain situations that can prevent students from taking the steps that we know might not be the easiest or the fastest, but that we've tested and believe will lead to learning. AI can also disrupt the useful signal of assessments. So when you're an instructor, you want to know what your students know and don't know. You want to know how they're thinking about things, where their hearts and minds and skills are at, and AI can disrupt the signal that you're getting back from the things that you used to assign them to do, the assessments that you used to ask them to do and currently do. And AI will transform the tasks students do in the real world. So after graduation, students are already doing things that they weren't doing a year ago in their professional lives, no matter what field they're in. And a couple of years from now, there are things that they're doing today that they won't be doing. And so this is an incredibly complex disruption. And it's hard to think about adapting our teaching to work with this sea change. And the sea change is gains and losses, and it's also uncertainty. So that kind of leads us into this discernment process, which is more grounded in our courses, what we're teaching and how we're teaching it. And the questions of the discernment process are, what are the skills and content that students should learn without AI? So where is that productive human struggle the best that we know how to do? And where should that continue on? And then what are the skills and content that students should learn enhanced by AI? So where can AI lift what students can do, how they can think, how they can approach problems, but the content is maybe familiar to us. And then lastly, what's going to be transformed by AI? So what are those new things that students will be doing that they weren't doing before? And what are the things that fall away? And the last one's the hardest one. So our faculty will respond to some of these ideas in their next portion. But I just want to give a quick note that any redesign goes along with some good practices that we sort of know. There are probably good practices that aren't on here that folks in this room know, and also good practices that maybe we haven't uncovered yet. But here's some that this group knows about. So we're talking about clear department and classroom policies, about how AI should be used, about philosophies, about tasks that you can do with AI and tasks that you can't do with AI, and just what the instructor cares about. Making that clear to students, I think, is really, really important. Citations, so showing where you got your ideas, citing them clearly. The library at the Kennedy School has put together a wonderful citation guide for AI. I'm sure other folks have done other similar wonderful projects. Keep in mind that kind of lineage of citation. Transcripts is something that shows up when a project entails using AI. Show the transcript, show the threads, show evidence of the interactions you had, and make that part of the assignment. And then finally, reflection, metacognition. Tari's going to get into a deeper dive on that. And finally, this is all still in progress. I have things that I'm telling people in consultation are a good idea, and then I tell them, come back and tell me if it worked, because I don't know. So I'm going to turn this over to Teddy.
Awesome. Thanks so much, May. May has been such an amazing thought partner at least for me, in terms of understanding how I should be approaching AI in my classroom. I am, as I said before, at the Kennedy School, so I teach primarily students statistics who are not themselves have any background at all in statistics. So it's already hard enough to get students to think it's important and valuable to learn what they're doing, and I think it's getting a little bit harder, though I do think one interesting thing about generative AI is I don't think we have the luxury of saying, do it because I said so anymore. I don't think student motivation is a sufficient condition to get students to really engage in what you want to do, but I think it has become absolutely necessary in a way that's maybe useful in terms of getting us to rethink the kind of work that we do. So I'm going to talk about my approach in 3 ways, and I'm going to map it onto what sort of May said about things that we want students to do with AI, skills that they want to develop with AI, skills that they want to develop without AI, and skills that they want to develop about AI. I think these distinctions are important. So the first type, skills with AI, are situations where the students aren't really learning how to use AI well. I have created some kind of structured scenario where then I'm sort of telling them how to use it in order to deepen their learning about something different. So right now, in all of my assignments, my problem sets are the main thing that I use in my course. Every question, there's usually about 3 to 5 questions per problem set, has a traffic light. And a traffic light is in this way. So green is essentially you can use AI however you want to answer the questions. You should sort of stand by whatever you say, but that is sort of allowed to do. Yellow is some kind of restricted use where I make clear why they're using it in the way that I want them to use it and so forth. And so most of my assignment questions are yellow in some way. And then red is something where I say I really don't want you to use AI at all. And I explain why, and sometimes I have ways of actually measuring that, but that's not always the case. So for example, we do pre-class work before every class, and all of those pre-class exercises are red. So I ask students to not use AI to answer those questions. Part of how I make sure this is true is that I bring quotes into class, and I ask students to kind of talk more about, not really in an adversarial way, just talk more about what you're doing. And I have actually had a student where I showed a quote, and I guess it was AI generated, because their answer to when I said, can you say more about that, was no. And that was it was a pretty intense and kind of tense moment in the classroom, but I think it was important in terms of holding people accountable. The second, this is the most common kind, is if I have a question, for example, where they're exploring a data set, I'll say you may use our tutor bot, which we host on the platform Ping Pong, called StatGPT, and it's sort of structured to not give answers. It has the course lecture notes, and it's very focused on not giving away the answers to questions, but help people if they're stuck. So I have guidance along these lines. And then some, for example, if there are optional questions where I just want to deepen their learning, I say absolutely use whatever you want, and that's perfectly okay with me. In terms of whether this works well, I do have some context where, for example, I make a practice problem bot where they have to share a transcript with me of the practice problems that they use to make with this bot that I made that has a certain sort of set of practice problems that it can go through and adapt in terms of difficulty levels and things like that. In terms of how students react to this, I have like fresh off the printing press information. We just did our mid-course feedback, and here is how people felt about both Ping Pong, which is our AI bots, and the AI guidance in our problem sets. For the most part, people found it useful to have that guidance, useful to have these tutor bots available to them. The ones who were less satisfied, I think, had very interesting and thoughtful approaches to it. Some said, I really don't want to be using AI in the work that I do. Others said, I want to be using commercial tools instead of the ones that you're giving us because I want to develop my skills in those. Really, I think, thoughtful reactions to this. But in general, this is at least useful for me to know that I should probably continue and build on the approach that we've already taken. The second is skills without AI. And I do think there's an extent to which, pen and paper analog type assessments are back, or maybe we never left, but are back in a more important way than they were before. And so I do have this in my syllabus. Most of my assignments are take-home assignments. And I explicitly say, when it's time for exams, we won't have AI to help. And so make sure you focus on that when you're working on your learning. Even if you decide to deviate from our course guidelines, remember that there are going to be situations where you're not going to be able to use it. And those are actually pretty important for your grades. Another type of assessment of this type is oral assessments or oral exams. The kind of person that I would think to talk about this sort of thing would be Andrew Ho, who does this, I think, very, very carefully and thoughtfully. And I think it's really important to do that kind of thing, in part because I don't think we assess well enough how students act when sort of off the cuff about the topics of our course. We really emphasize sort of like deep writing and like over time, but how people speak extemporaneously, I think actually is a pretty important skill in a lot of things that we talk about. And so I do think oral assessments can be helpful. I'm going to now share something that I think is controversial, but then I heard that Todd was here this morning, so I don't think it's going to be that controversial. It's going to be pretty straightforward, but we have started to pilot in certain contexts AI run oral assessments. So these are live verbal conversations with AIs that have been structured to ask certain questions and to ask for feedback. It's real time, so there's less time for students to do things like go look up or ask ChatGPT what the answers are. We do these in fairly low stakes scenarios right now, and then the grading doesn't happen by AI. We get a transcript of that conversation, and then we grade the transcript. So we're using AI to sort of help do some of these assessments at scale, and then trying to assess them ourselves afterwards. The thing that you lose from this is something that I think Andrew really does very well, which is there's a certain amount of connection with your instructor that happens during these assessments, and that is lost in this. I want to make clear that this isn't like strictly better in any way, but it's at least something that we're experimenting with. And the final one is using AI facility as a goal in itself. So this is skills about AI, things that my students as a professional school, they're going to go out into the world and they need to be good at using AI tools for various things. And I don't think that just means use AI as much as possible. It means develop the skills to use AI effectively. So here's a question that I have in my problem set where they're supposed to make a visual using Excel and make some sort of scatter plot or something like that. And they can use ChatGPT to help them, but they have to make it themselves. The next step was use any AI tool you want to make a visualization that you don't know how to make in Excel, something more complex. Add additional variables, create some kind of sort of interactive type visualization, do something that you don't know how to do already, right? The third part, and this is I think the most important part, is it's very clear that tools, AI tools, in many, many contexts will say things very confidently or make things very confidently that are false, that are just completely untrue. And they will say that with the same level of confidence that they say true things. And that's a really big challenge. And so part of my problem sets that involve what would spot checks look like if you wanted to actually stand by this visualization? What would you want to check before you yourself were willing to say, I made this visualization and I think this like really accurately reflects the data? And so trying to build that kind of discernment is sort of the next step that I think, at least in my course, is the kind of AI skills that I really want to start to develop with my students. So I believe that's it, and I'll now turn it over to Tari.
Thank you so much, Teddy. So I'll provide a slightly different context, but you'll see some themes that have already been introduced, and I'll just reinforce those through my own teaching. So the teaching context I'm going to talk about is a course I teach at Harvard Medical School. It's a graduate course on the science and theory of teaching and learning. And I teach two different sections of the course. One is for our Masters of Medical Education program. And so the students in this course are largely mid-career medical professionals, medical educators who are coming back and getting additional formal training in medical education. And then I also teach a section of the course for PhD students in the various biomedical PhD programs based at the medical school, as well as we've had postdocs who are also interested in teaching, and our curriculum fellows education postdoc program who also take this course. The overarching principles that I'll kind of lead with that explain my approach to Gen AI in the context of this class. So I'm coming at this from the perspective that Gen AI has already transformed education. And so we need to be engaging educators to reflect on how Gen AI can either support or undermine learning, because it can do both, as Esther introduced. We need to effectively train educators to leverage Gen AI, not just to promote learning in their own students, but also how they can leverage Gen AI in their own craft, in our practices of instructional design, course design, so that we can do this more effectively and more efficiently. My approach really does center metacognition, or this idea of reflection. One really cool thing about this class is that I have educators or educators in training taking a course. So we get to flip back and forth of how are you thinking about Gen AI use with your educator hat on, and then how are you thinking about AI use from the perspective of the student and the learner in the class. And so I think that gives us a lot of unique opportunities to have deep reflection about the ways in which Gen AI can help or hurt learning. Okay. The other frameworks that I'll just mention that inform my thinking about this, there are many, but a few that come to mind here. Transparency in teaching and learning, which is really this idea that me as an educator is going to explicitly explain my rationale for doing different things. And that's because you saw that in Teddy's traffic light approach of, we're not just saying you can or can't use AI, but why. And so I do that not just in the Gen AI specific context, but across everything that I'm doing with my students. So one of the things that I do in the class is that I release annotated lesson plans for the course afterwards that explain why I structured the lesson that way, as another way for students to get this meta understanding of teaching and learning. And then the other one is this students as partners framework, which really encourages us to invite students in as co-producers, co-creators of our course and our classroom norms. And I'll touch on that in a minute. So when I think about Gen AI use in my Teaching 100 class, the name of this course, there are kind of two buckets that I'll touch on, focusing on this first, which is how am I considering how to redesign assignments and assessments to incorporate Gen AI, either how you're using it to support other learning objectives or how you're using it to develop educators' Gen AI competencies themselves, as well as the general policies for AI use in the course outside of these specific assignments. I just want to introduce a little bit about the approach that I use generically, and then I'll give a deep dive into one specific example of how I've incorporated Gen AI. But so when I'm thinking about the assignments where I don't want AI to be used, well, across all of these buckets, I'm thinking about the learning goals, but in particular, the assignments where I kind of land thinking that we don't want to be using AI is that when the learning goals themselves are the things that I think AI would shortcut, right? If you're trying to wrestle with a concept for the first time, or interact with new knowledge, Gen AI could very easily spit that out for you. And so if the learning goal is at that level, I'm likely to say, don't use AI. I'm also cognizant thinking about cognitive load of our students. Using AI itself introduces metacognitive and cognitive demands. And so thinking about, well, is that going to be a distraction or overwhelm my students and detract from the specific learning goals that I have for them? I'm also thinking about the skills that are needed to effectively use Gen AI. This is a skill set that you have to develop. And so again, if that's something that I have to be teaching on top of whatever my other learning goals are, that might be something that's too much for certain assignments. When I'm thinking about the assignments, when I might want to enhance the assignments by AI, I'm really starting to apply this when the tasks are professionally aligned tasks. Again, I'm working with educators or educators in training. I'm also thinking about how AI can reinforce learning. So at this point, maybe the students have a little bit of a base knowledge already. And so we're using AI to reinforce that or engage more deeply. I also think that Gen AI can be a really helpful source for additional feedback. And then again, we're starting to now think about where can I insert Gen AI into assignments where it's not going to detract from the other learning goals, but rather I can use these assignments to develop educators' own skills in leveraging Gen AI for their own instructional practices. And then getting to transform by AI, if I'm going to transform an assignment entirely with AI, again, this is really, I'm thinking about the application to authentic professional tasks. As May alluded to, some things people are going to be doing completely differently in the near years. I will say for myself as an educator, the way I design lesson plans is completely different before AI. And it's not that I'm throwing all my expertise out the window, but it's just a different process and I can do different things with it. And so thinking about how we can prepare our professional students to engage in professionally authentic ways with the technology. And in doing so, again, there's that skill development, and I'm also thinking about how I can use innovative Gen AI-based assignments to scaffold other more advanced learning objectives. I do just, so across these dimensions, the no AI, enhanced by AI, or transformed by AI, for me at least, this largely maps onto how I'm thinking about the novice to expert transition. So again, in my own classroom, the assignments that have no AI are tending to fall more on when I'm introducing new content or new skills. And then as my students, as we're moving through the semester and they're building that expertise, I'm starting to incorporate more AI so that they can see the opportunity for how they can apply AI to enhance their professional practice. It also then puts them at this position to to better engage in a more sophisticated manner in this metacognitive reflection, because they now have a little bit of content expertise to, say, critique the output of the Gen AI and really reflect on, did I find this useful or not, on top of this other base of knowledge. So that's obviously the focus for this session, but I did want to just briefly comment on policies for AI use in general, because as has already been introduced, this is important for setting our local classroom context. For me, I have a different approach, and if anyone has questions, happy to go more in depth afterwards. I actually collaboratively co-create my Gen AI policy with students at the beginning of the class, and because I run 2 sections of the course, we actually do this separately. So I always had the fear that what if they come up with completely different policies? That hasn't yet happened. But I found that this to be a very productive exercise because it's in this process that we're able to lead with, at the beginning of the semester, concepts about metacognition and critical reflection of AI. In what ways, one of the questions I posed to them, in what ways is a more restrictive versus a more permissive AI policy aligned with your professional goals, aligned with our learning goals in the class? And so we can stimulate a lot of deep discussion about this. And so I'll just mention that anytime I incorporate AI into an assignment, the expectation is that students have to follow the instructions and use AI. But for those where I don't, we defer to whatever our class compact and guidelines have been established as. Okay. So now I'm going to just give one brief example of an assignment where I modified it in the past few years to enhance the assignment with AI. And again, as I'll describe, this is a professionally aligned task. So in my course, the capstone assignment is that students generate a syllabus for a mock course of, maybe they're actually going to be teaching it, maybe it's just a hypothetical course. So they make a syllabus and a corresponding lesson plan, and they have to annotate the syllabus and the lesson plan to demonstrate how they incorporated evidence-based approaches and concepts from the course into their documents. And so the original assignment goals is to have the students apply their knowledge from the course to a professionally relevant context. And then again, we're asking them to metacognitively reflect on the rationale for their decisions and to tie that back to content from the course through these annotations. So with the new assignment that I'll describe in more depth on the next slide, I'll just say that I added some learning goals, which now the assignment, in addition to maintaining the original goals, so I'm saying I designed it in such a way that AI is enhancing it, it's not changing or undermining the original goals, that now educators are also developing skills in prompt engineering, and we're having them to metacognitively reflect also on Gen AI, its utility in this assignment for their professional activities, and thinking about it from both the perspective of an educator and a learner. Okay. So as I mentioned, the original assignment was to annotate a syllabus and a lesson plan that they created. The new assignment, and I introduced this 2 years ago now, fall 2024, so the data I'll be showing here is from that initial pilot. After they created their own annotations, they were instructed to use Gen AI to annotate the lesson plan. I focused just on the lesson plan because it's a smaller document and more wieldy. And that was literally all the instruction I gave them. Use Gen AI to annotate the lesson plans. We had up until that point in class not given any instruction on how to generate good prompts for Gen AI. They did that. They submitted what their prompt was. They could use whatever tool they wanted. Everyone ended up choosing ChatGPT. And then they received feedback on their prompt itself from the instructional team. And then at this point, we provided scaffolded instruction in Gen AI prompt engineering. After they received that instruction, we then asked them, do it again. Now create a second prompt to redo the Gen AI annotations. And then we engage them in a series of short metacognitive reflection questions to reflect on this activity as well as AI use in the course more broadly. And so these were what some of those reflection questions were. We did ask them to actually reflect on what was the quality of the output that you received after the first and second prompt. I'm not going to show data about that, but happy to talk about that later. What general insights have you gained from this exercise? And then overall, did you find that the instructors' incorporation of Gen AI into course assignments enhanced your learning? Explain why or why not. So I'll just close by showing a little bit of data, summarizing the qualitative responses from students' metacognitive reflections to give you a sense of what they're taking away from this. So from that one question, what were your general insights from this assignment? I reviewed all of the text responses and was able to identify kind of 5 overarching themes. And I've given example quotes here from students' reflections, so you can just get a sense of the flavor of these themes. One, students reported that they found that AI was useful. They recognize the importance of prompt quality. And in that other question that I'm not showing the data for, they were able to elaborate in very specific ways, the ways in which their annotations after the second prompt improved. They were able to recognize limitations of AI. So for example, the absence of scientific citations or hallucinations. They recognize the importance of teaching and learning to optimize prompts. So from both the educator and learner perspective. And they did find this assignment to be applicable to their professional training. For the second question, the majority of the class, 17 of 19 students, did say that Gen AI activities enhanced their learning. And when I asked in what ways, the 3 themes that emerged, so they found that they were able to leverage Gen AI more effectively for instructional design. The act of just getting exposed to and practice with what they deemed as an important new technology was also reflected in their responses. And so saying, I probably wouldn't have done this on my own, but I feel better equipped to do so because you purposefully incorporated it. And then a third thing, which I also found rewarding, was that students did report that they were actually then able to use AI to reinforce course concepts itself. So outside of the specific assignment that I had them use it in, throughout the course, because we were integrating Gen AI, they were using it in a way to actually further their learning of the content knowledge in the course. And so with that, like I mentioned, this was 2 years ago. And so I've continued to iterate on this because in recent years, not only have the models, ChatGPT now does different things than back then, but also students' incoming baseline knowledge about Gen AI has changed as well. So about prompt engineering. And so what we've been moving towards now more is towards the further enhancement as well as transformation by AI. And so one of the things that we're piloting this fall, as I'm teaching the course now, is we've developed a rubric to evaluate the syllabi, and an AI tool, my collaborator, Greg Cooling, who's in the back of the room, very talented curriculum fellow at Harvard Medical School, that we have a custom AI tool that we'll be able to use with this rubric and engage the students with use of this tool as another way to engage with Gen AI for instructional design and improvement. So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Esther, I think.
We're good. Thank you. We are now going to move into our small group activity, and we do have a QR code. So there's digital materials available as well. Due to the overwhelming attendance of this workshop, we don't have enough printouts for everyone. But if you prefer pencil and paper, there are some on the tables. Please feel free to share to the folks on the floor. And if you prefer a digital copy, we'll have a QR code in just 1 second. So I have like a quick minute to explain the activity, and then we're going to leave you alone for 10 minutes to work in small groups. So the way this is going to work, we have sample assignments pre-written for you. So when you split into groups, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, lovely folks on this side of the room, please do assignment number 1. Lovely folks on this side of the room, please do assignment number 2. So get into your small groups, read your assignment together. And this is very important. Please nominate one group member to report out on your discussion and decision, because we will be calling on you and we are not afraid to cold call. All right. So once you're in your groups, you have your assignment, you've picked your report out person, then you're going to think critically about AI use of your assignment. Hint, hint, learning goals are key here. So you are going to decide on your assignment if the learning should be without AI, enhanced by AI, or transformed by AI. This is entirely up to you based off of the learning goals of your course. Then you will actually go through and use a template we've created to redesign the assignment. There's rooms for you to summarize your brainstorming and decision making. Again, please be ready to share. Here are our 2 scenarios, but first I'm going to throw the QR code up on the board so folks who want a digital copy can do that. So here are 2 learning scenarios. I am going to start our 10-minute timer. Ready, set, go. All right, everyone, we are at time. We started with assignment 1. So, Tari, I am going to start this discussion by cold calling Kama. Oh. And we are going to pass the mic over to you, and the lovely Tari will be facilitating the report out.
Thank you for our first kind of volunteer.
Yes, I was voluntold. So we, of course, had scenario 1, and I'm actually going to sit down because I can see my screen better. So apply fundamental business analytic methods to real world companies. We saw that as sort of the overall goal. So not really saying that, no AI or some AI, because we were looking at AI enhanced for the entire thing, so that first, no AI, work on developing proficiency in Excel for financial modeling and data interpretation, which none of us knew anything about. But then evaluating company performance in using standard business metrics, since we also didn't know what those were, we could easily see creating AI prompts to say, these are the standard business metrics, this is our company case, but then also look at something like, well, now this company's in Lagos, how does that change what these standards are? And then finally, practice documenting that using AI as an iterative process. You write it, you have AI give you some suggestion prompts, you rewrite, and you reanalyze everything at each step, using it somewhat like a tutorial.
Wonderful. So yeah, I like how you captured a few different uses of the no AI integrated in different ways. I'm curious across the room, as you're working in your small groups, do people generally find it easy to reach consensus as to what the appropriate path forward would be? Did you find that there was a lot of discussion or debate? How many people quickly came to consensus if we know exactly what to do here? We'll have it. Okay, a few. How many tables or small groups were kind of split, or there was some discussion back and forth as to how to integrate? Okay. And then did groups do similar to what this group did here, where maybe you came up with a few different examples of ways to use it, ways not, to split the difference, make everyone happy? Okay. Can we get one more volunteer, actual volunteer from this side of the room, or I can call on a table, to highlight maybe different ways in which you thought about incorporating AI or not to meet some of these learning objectives? In the back. Thank you. We have a mic.
Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm Susan from Huxley. So we had some really interesting discussion, and we came to a quick consensus that we didn't want to rely too heavily on AI, but we wanted to certainly incorporate it. And not relying heavily on AI was at the core of making sure that people had developed proficiency with Excel, understood the terminology and the relationships between the terms and the data that they were using. But then we thought about some creative ways to incorporate AI as they became more familiar with the data and the use of Excel. And one of the ways we thought about it was for research. So if the industry was unfamiliar, or the place where they did business, that they could do some research. And there were some really helpful caveats there in terms of validating, including citations, and then validating those links. So they didn't show up, as one example was a restaurant menu. That looks like a real citation. Another idea was to take the Excel spreadsheet and reinterpret it for a different audience, and then as an oral presentation, discuss the meaning of the data and the findings of that analysis, and to state their assumptions in that process. And then the third idea was to create an Excel bot that the teacher would create, and then use that to expand their thinking and validate, have you asked all the questions? Have you identified all the relevant relationships and important interpretations of this data?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, and thanks. Really appreciate all of the discussion, and I think we're going to get across the entire room a lot of different ideas surfaced. And while we're not going to have a chance to talk to every table, certainly, afterwards connect. I encourage you over lunch. You can try to meet people at other tables to share and compare notes too, because I think there were a lot of different ideas as we were walking around. I want to pivot now to scenario 2 on this side of the room. We get a volunteer to share their specific examples or ideas that came up, as well as any just overarching principles or themes that emerged from their discussion. Thank you.
So we generally landed on AI transformed for scenario 2. And what we ultimately came up with as the output was a simulation to help the students build the simulation in order to test the products themselves, the pitches themselves. But we also kind of engaged this idea, and maybe it's just like AI transform was the most encompassing for the assignment, but certain things would be no AI, like, I don't know, maybe determining which 3 companies or determining the market. So that's not AI supported. AI enhanced, we're assuming that they weren't graphic designers, so building pitch decks and stuff like that, maybe you could pass through a AI tool. But then ultimately the goal of creating a simulation would be a AI transformative aspect.
Wonderful. Thank you. One more example showcasing some different thoughts on this scenario. Thank you.
I volunteer as tribute. I think a lot of our time, not to give a very specific answer, but a lot of our time was, I think, debating enhanced versus transformed. And is it the entire process is transformed? Is it different pieces and segments? I loved one idea that we had received, or we were discussing this idea of maybe if AI is used to create the presentation, maybe everyone is on the hook in the final presentation to know what the bot spit out. Or we love this idea, we kind of brought up the idea of Shark Tank, right? So if we do have guest people coming in, maybe the questions that are asked by the judges, so to speak, maybe are AI generated, or again, to this point of the level in which AI is involved could perhaps dictate the feedback and the conversation after the fact. So there was a lot, most of the time, discussing the difference. And I think it really came down to thinking about segmenting the different parts of the example that was shared and how that ties into different learning objectives. We ultimately, I think the third bullet point about collaboration definitely very much felt like something AI should not be involved with, or, it could be used, but I think ultimately that's the human element kind of as an output from all of this.
Great. Now, just to wrap up, and I'll kick it back for a few minutes for Q&A. I like that last point about thinking about what is uniquely human versus AI. I've seen this published in a few different frameworks of how we can be thinking about AI not replacing humans, but really how it's enhancing our work. I know there's been a modified Bloom's taxonomy that's been published of thinking about how AI could overlay on and complement some of the different skills and types of knowledge that we're trying to teach with our learners. And in the medical education space in particular, kind of differentiating between what are those uniquely human skills and keeping sights on that, and then how AI can enhance that. So thank you all for your participation. I think we have a few minutes just for questions and wrap up.
Yes, thank you all so much. We have about 4 minutes for questions before our wrap up. Oh, I see a hand over here. Thank you.
I was just thinking of another use that wondered if you had tried. We do a thing called consolidation questions at the end of sections that are self-graded by the students. They write it, it's a case, they give an answer. We give them the model answer they can compare to. But I'm wondering about having them put it in AI to see where the AI may differ from the faculty answer and look at some of the limitations of AI, because teaching them about the issues of using AI is a tricky thing as well. Does anybody have experience with that?
Thank you. Any of our faculty panelists want to respond?
Sure, I'll respond briefly. So I think especially a couple of years ago, I was very gung-ho about showing AI output and then having students explain why it's wrong. I think the utility of that and the performance of these models is changing a lot to the point where I think that approach is not something I necessarily go with, but the act of talking through an AI response and like thinking through like, is this insight good? What is missing from it? Things like that. In the same way that you would do any other human one, I do think has validity to it, but I personally no longer show like very silly AI responses for people to critique, because I just think the quality of the output has changed a lot.
So I'm curious, and Teddy, you already described how your own approach to using AI has changed pretty rapidly. I'm hearing incremental change in the conversation that's going on in this room today, and I'm wondering about if you're looking a year out, 3 years out, 5 years out, how is AI actually disrupting how you're teaching the classes? Or which classes you're teaching?
Well, I think, I mentioned already that the capstone assignment of having people create syllabi, de novo, and I'm quickly moving towards, adapting that. I think as the realities of how we are actually using it in instructional design and the tools that become available, like spending time making PowerPoint decks from scratch, like that might, like there are already tools out there that are doing that. So maybe in future iterations of the course, we would spend less time on how to, or actually asking them by hand to make certain instructional materials, and maybe we're using Gen AI more in that context. I think, at least for me though, and this has come up a little bit, my perspective is AI is certainly transforming how we're using it professionally, but you cannot use it professionally without that content knowledge expertise. And so this has come up in a few different ways. So at least for me, in the near 1, 2, 3 years, I don't see a place where I could take people who are completely naive with educational theory and evidence-based approaches to learning and say, start by making an AI thing and critique it, because you don't have any framework to do so. When I, as an education expert, whatever, can use Gen AI to propose lesson plans or propose course design, I'm able to apply the expert eye to that. So at least for me, I think that when it comes to basic content knowledge, we're going to have to engage students in that without Gen AI. But I think the application to professional settings and the percentage of our classes devoted to that, I could see that changing, at least for me in my context.
Great. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We are all happy to continue the discussion. Our emails are up here and probably also somewhere on the HILT website. We'd love for you to reach out to us. Thank you so much for attending. Have a wonderful rest of your day.